We got Andy Helko. We are remote today. So how you doing, Andy?
I'm doing well. Well, you're remote. I'm here, the lone survivor.
Braving it.
There is no one here. I just put pants on for the show. I've been at the office here by myself.
Yeah.
Figured I'd, put my clothes back on for everybody, just to make it a little bit more of a family-friendly show, because that's what we're looking at here today.
Yep. So I'm still in my pajama pants.
Yeah. How's your quarantine going?
Yeah, it's been a productive quarantine.
That's good.
What are we talking about here today? What is this Principle 10?
So Principle 10 for SaaS Coach, and we're talking all about retention, is I'm going to bid $1, Bob. The Price is Right reference, anyone? So today, I know, and that is not a place that you want to go to right now. Is the Price is Right. It's pretty empty, but we're talking all about pricing and getting it right, because one of the things with retention is obviously being able to price your product right, because at the end of the day, your pricing, although that's a part of getting people in the door, it's always going to be an evaluation point for whether they continue to use it. And a lot of times if they're in free trials and testing something out, that retention and pushing them into a paid account has a lot to do with pricing. So this is a big piece of how we keep users over a long period of time. Don't you agree, Tony?
I certainly agree. Yeah, and a big part of this, we're going to go into some things here, but it's how do you continue to communicate the value that your software, presents to users. And a lot of times it's, we're giving them reminders of different features that you have and whatnot. It's having the right pricing structure for the offer, and so on and so forth. So we'll dive into that a little bit further. But pricing, it's a big one for purposes of retention. You have to have the right price point and communicate that value in order to retain users.
Totally. So let's see. Let's dive in a little bit. So the first place to talk is obviously this balance of value versus price, and really understanding, what is the real value or even the perceived value, versus what's the cost, and what does it take to actually create this solution, and really making sure that you're balancing those two things, right?
Yeah, and I think, when you have to remind yourself that the value, to your point, Andy, you mentioned, it's both the real plus perceived value. So when someone thinks about, am I going to keep this, hey, times are uncertain right now, so I'm going to think about what do I absolutely need to keep? What are some of the subscriptions and things that I can get rid of? I'm not just thinking of what is the actual true value that I get from a software that I don't use as much as I should. It's also, what could that do for me? What is my perceived value? What do I imagine that can be done? What am I losing out on if I cancel?
Yeah.
And so it's important that that's positioned, and sometimes making the point that a lot of times users don't fully use all the features. So if you can communicate, and encourage people to use more of your solution, then that creates, even if they're not using it, if they know there's more stuff there, that's more perceived value, even if they're not actually using it. So it is important to balance the two, but always to get people to know of your full feature set and what are the benefits of utilizing those, because that all plays into, in the mind of the user, the total value. So real plus perceived, and then the other side is the cost, right? So that value has to be greater than the cost. And it's a pretty simple equation, but I think have to be reminded of that, the way you position it and staying in touch. A lot of things we've already talked about go into this, but communicating all of the different feature sets, even the support and everything that you can, that's all equals value.
Yeah, I think that first part that you said, we're right now going through hopefully what's a short downturn in the economy, and a lot of companies are evaluating, are there things that they can cut? We've done the same, as look through our 30 or 40 software subscriptions and said, is this something that we're getting value out of for the price? And if something's only $30 a month, but it provides a lot of value and a lot of use, versus if something's $500 a month and there's an easy way to replace it or live without it, definitely changes the equation a little bit.
For sure.
So then next, factoring and scalability. So what are we looking at with something like this?
So I think when you're talking about pricing, you want to look at models, and I want to say on the next slide we'll go into some of the details of things to consider when looking at the models. But scalability is you need to balance keeping costs low enough for users to purchase, but also there's got to be enough profit in, there's got to be the profit margin that's in there so that it is scalable.
Right.
You don't want it to be that you're just breaking even and you're gaining all these users. Now that's more, that's taking away, that requires more resources and effort to support on your side, which is meaning that it's going to cost you more to operate. So we need a scalable model. So pricing has to match and be able to allow us to grow and scale.
Yeah, I mean, it can be a barrier on both sides. If you're not priced high enough that you're not making profit, you can't scale because you can't invest in the things that you need, like infrastructure and marketing. But on the other side, if you're priced too high, you're not attaining the users that you need to actually gain the scale and size to actually continue to invest. And so it's really that, how do you find that Goldilocks zone and eat your porridge perfectly?
Yeah, and a good example, Andy, is we just recently launched a new service that is, it's not software, but it's heavily automated. And as we went through the exercise, we had to figure out all of the elements of that service and where does the price point need to be at so that we're profitable and that we can scale it out, because that was the idea behind that service. And we had to adjust some things to make sure that we were going to be profitable if we scaled. So that was the whole point of bringing that service on board.
100%. Yeah, so talking about some of the different pricing models, I think people don't realize all of the different ways that you can look at pricing. And this isn't even a full list, but this is kind of some of the popular ones that we can talk about and go through for people. But, the first, penetration pricing, where really the strategy is how do you in the beginning create reduced prices to rapidly gain adoption in a new market, maybe secure a first mover advantage. And so this is really something where you're launching a new product and you want to gain scale, there's value there, and you're really undercutting the price so that you can bring in a lot of users and have that clout of owning the market. And then you can have strategies in the future of either increasing the prices, adding add-ons to it, whatever it might be. But really in the beginning, you just want to get volume as much as possible.
To that model, that's one where going back to scale, that may not be scalable. That may be something that you want to get to a point of critical mass or user base that has some influence or whatever it is. There's many different reasons for that, but that may not be the way to continue to grow the business. But it's a great starting point for a lot of businesses.
And I think the point that SaaS companies need to remember is that pricing changes. We see it all the time with products we use and clients that we have, is that there are points where you have to reevaluate your pricing, and some people may be grandfathered into that for a short period of time. Even look at Google with their apps and what they offer for business accounts, is that in the beginning, this probably fits one of these pricing models, free trial, whatever it might be, but it was free for a long time. Then it went to pretty inexpensive. And slowly over the years, they've just been increasing the price, and as they add new features and it becomes more valuable to the marketplace. But they're not afraid that you may have to change pricing, and people will eventually have to move into it. Netflix sees it all the time that they're increasing pricing, and people scream about it, but a lot of them still pay it.
Yeah.
The next one, captive pricing. this is an interesting one where you're offering a core product for a lower than expected price, but then charging extra for additional. And so we see this a lot where, maybe there's some core piece and that's something that's not very expensive and it gets a lot of people in the door, but then you've got products around it that you're probably charging a little bit extra for, and really give that core product additional power that most people need.
Yeah, it's an interesting model there, because I think the idea is if you can get someone to see that core product as a really great value, then you hook them in with that, and then you can grow each account by offering those additional services and products.
Yeah, and I've seen this a lot in like the WordPress world with add-ons, is that, you have someone that offers maybe like a free membership plugin. And so then you can put membership on your site, but then if you want to do payment processing, it's $100. And then if you want to add unique profile URLs, it's another $100 and so the core product could even be free or it could be really low priced, but then they've got all these add-ons and additional pieces that really give that power. And I've seen that work really well in that WordPress space, because someone says initially, oh, I'm just going to install this, but as they get into it or it grows over time, they realize they need all those other ones, and it ends up being something that's where the company makes a lot of their money off of.
Especially the WordPress one is a good example, because if you go and get that free plugin or whatever it is, and then you want to add the additional functionality, now you have the question, okay, how do I go about this? I could do this through another plugin, but it may not work perfectly or may not integrate with other the plugin I'm already using. So it's kind of a no-brainer to go with and scale out with that, that product suite.
Totally. And then there's skimming pricing, where you're setting a high initial price for a new product, but then lowering it over time. And really this is kind of mixes with the next one of prestige pricing, which is about maintaining high prices in order to convey a sense of quality, exclusivity, or luxury. But you'll see the skimming pricing where, if it's something new and it's valuable and it's really desirable, that at the beginning you're kind of creating that prestige, and then eventually you continue to lower it over the time as the market changes. And I've seen that in a number of products where they really do want to make it seem like there's a lot of exclusivity in the beginning.
Yeah, the exclusivity is a good one, because sometimes it gets you to act, because it could be there's a limited number of users that are going to be allowed in. There's a lot that goes into that. That prestige pricing is interesting, because there's really something to be said for what people believe when they pay a certain dollar amount. If they pay very little or free, usually they don't think much of that product, whether that product is is great or it's lousy. Whereas the opposite way also works. People tend to value things that they pay for, and if they pay more for it, then they tend to value it more. So it's pretty interesting. Pricing has a whole psychology element and aspect to it, which we're touching on. But I always find it fascinating. You got to test these things out and see where you're at. For the skimming in prestige, I'll just add, those are a couple where you have to have the demand for your product to be able to pull those off. You can't go in with something that's a brand new concept. People don't really, they're just trying to figure it out. That'd be much more difficult. But when it's something that there's already a demand for, then it's a little bit easier to pull those off.
Yeah, the prestige pricing, I think, can come for established businesses. It's kind of that model of, no one ever gets fired for hiring IBM because they're the best, and they're going to be twice as expensive. But at the end of the day, there's this assumption that there's a level of quality there that, if you made that decision, that was the best decision you could possibly make. When you've got big companies like that, an Oracle or LinkedIn or others, they may even be able to pull off prestige pricing. LinkedIn, I think about like some of their add-ons for recruiting companies and recruiting. It's pretty high priced, but they can do that because they're already in the market and it's a new service, but they can say, look, this is quality. We're only letting so many people have access to it because we don't want it to get overused, and so we're going to charge a really high price for it. So it can work for some businesses early on.
Yeah, great points.
And then we talk a lot about this, the free trial pricing, and this even gets into the freemium model, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But free trial pricing is really getting someone in the door, giving them a chance to try it for 15, 30 days, maybe even a freemium version where there's no cost at the initial piece, and that kind of ties into that captive pricing as well. Some of these are real overlaps, but free trial pricing is pretty common and popular as far as models go.
For sure. You see it all over the place. It just makes sense, right? Free is so easy to spread and adapt, that it's typically a really great way to start out, or at least test, if nothing else.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I think that's the point, that some of these can be combined. You could be doing captive pricing or prestige pricing that still have a free trial. Skimming is kind of a model that leverages prestige in the beginning, but eventually lowers it over time. So some of these pieces are, you're not just choosing one forever. You might be choosing how you enter the market and then how you change over time, or even maybe the difference between different packages that you're offering. Cost plus pricing is really a very simple factor. There are some companies that'll sit and say, okay, it costs us $10 a month for every user from the infrastructure, $10 a month for this, $30 for that, and we're going to add on, 20% to the top of our costs, and that's our pricing. We don't care what the competitors are doing. We don't care what the value is perceived or what the price sensitivity of our audience is. Here's our cost. Here's adding 20% on. It's a simple formula, and that's our price.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think that's seen a lot in the B2B space that I'm familiar with, more so than like B2C world. But a lot of times that also has elements of kind of relationship that's built in, and other things, but it is an interesting model.
Yeah. And then really value-based pricing, which is kind of a little bit of the opposite, but not really. But again, this is kind of not factoring in outside influences, but more looking at, like, as a company, we want to be making 50% or 60%, and we don't care about the customer. So this is how we're going to price it. And it's very similar to cost plus, but I would say cost plus is like we're looking to get a minimal amount, whereas value pricing is really, we want to achieve these revenue goals, and this is what it has to be priced at to do that.
Kind of working backwards, so some reverse engineering going on there.
So those are some of the models. Again, I think there's a lot to look at, and it is challenging for either a new software company or even an existing one to kind of evaluate, how do they need to change them. But a lot of this stuff can, again, tie back to the retention piece that, if you've got penetration pricing and over time you're increasing prices, like Netflix, you have to expect that you may lose 10% of users, but the increase in pricing changes that, versus, if you're doing cost plus, you may not get that scalability that we talked about. And from a retention standpoint, maybe it's easier to retain users, and that's part of the strategy, versus prestige, where you may lose users on a regular basis, but you're getting so much margin that you're okay having a little bit higher of a churn rate. So I think that's why, pricing really plays into this retention piece, is that it could be part of the thought process of long-term, what are the implications to the retention based off of the profit and some of these other factors.
Yeah.
So we kind of just touched on this, but just to take it a little bit more is the pricing model. So the free trial that we talked about, a freemium where you can get a basic version, But then really what we didn't talk about in a lot of these models is, what you're seeing is most are annual or monthly subscriptions. Monthly, you tend to pay a little bit of a higher fee. And then finally, kind of the licenses, which we talked about WordPress. You see that a lot of time is there's the licenses for the number of sites, or you can even get into user licenses where it's a sliding scale and it's $50 for every user that you add on annually. So there's a lot of different ways that you can even take the previous slide and then tie that into how you're actually going to be charging people.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of this depends, so the multi-user, that works, again, when we're looking at, enterprise software and whatnot, where you're bringing on accounts that have, multiple or many users. A lot of times that makes sense to do something like that. I've kind of noticed just the simplification of pricing models for a lot of SaaS products out there. I don't know if you've seen the same thing, Andy, but I see more just kind of simple pricing that is easy for people to understand and wrap their head around.
Yeah, I've been pushing that with clients a lot and talking to them. I love the models where, it's $10 a month per user. There's not multiple packages. There's not all these sliding scales of what features are included. I like that simplicity model, but it's interesting to me that a lot of the bigger companies, and maybe it's just because they do have the establishment, go for a lot of these complex pricing models. Like, I think of HubSpot. I mean, they've got multiple products. It's on a sliding scale based on the number of users. Plus, they've got multiple packages. And same thing for stuff like MailChimp is you've got multiple packages and then a sliding scale behind that. And so it's interesting to me that you see that, but it might be a lesson for new businesses that HubSpot can do it because they've got such a big client base and a strong sales force versus if you're new to the market, having a complex model could really diminish the amount of conversions and even potentially the retention that you have.
Yeah, definitely something to consider, and good point there.
Yeah. And then tell us a little bit about kind of communicating value.
Yeah, so this goes back to kind of what we talked about a little bit earlier in the conversation. Really, it's important, again, to justify pricing, the value has to outweigh whatever that cost is. And so we have to be really good when we're communicating any of the touch points that we have with users, with customers, in doing the following things that are on the slide there. So positioning, summarizing features and benefits, really allowing our users to understand what the value is to them, right? They may not realize everything that's built in there, and continually putting out, your value proposition. That's not just bringing someone on board, that's for the retention sake as well. Just clarity, so you're able to establish that trust and understanding. So when someone signs up for, a free trial, that they understand that they will be billed immediately at that 8th day or that 15th day or whatever it is. Really, that is important to build trust. People get really upset when something happens with their billing that they're not expecting. Simplicity, we talked about that from a pricing standpoint, but also just utilization of your product and diving into, again, I go back to features. How do you allow people to make the most of the software that they're using? Some validation. So sometimes this is, when you're ongoing nurturing and marketing to existing customers, you want to talk about, hey, I'll see this a lot where companies basically in their, emails that they put out to customers, they talk about, case studies and testimonials. And it has, a lot of times they're interesting where it's like, wow, I never would have thought to do that with that software, but wow, that's cool. Maybe I'll try that. So it gives people ideas on different things they can be doing or incredible things that have been accomplished, or, someone who is a very basic, user that was able to maximize, showing them the ease of use or something like that. But essentially those are telling stories to validate kind of the value. And then a big one is support. So you got to support your users. That right in and of itself, good experience with support makes the overall perceived and real value to a user just increased. So every touch point with customer support is really important, and the better that experience is, the value of your product goes up. So the idea is just to be continual in your communicating of these different elements, and there's more to this. These are just the big ones that came to mind here, but just to continue to communicate value.
And I think we talked about this in our last series, which was about, website conversion for SaaS companies. And one of the places we talked about was the pricing page. And a lot of these things were bullet points for that. And so definitely a worthwhile episode for people to go check out in, relation to this one, because that was really talking about how you lay out a pricing page and some of the strategies that you can use from a usability standpoint to get more people to convert on a pricing page.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, those are so closely related, the pricing pages. We're talking a lot of the same models. We're talking a lot of the same, pricing psychology that goes behind that. But up front, that decision, the product, your company are a little bit newer or maybe unknown to them. Now that you get them on board, it's a matter of keeping them fans, keeping them to, believing they made a great decision when they signed up, and give them more reason to stay on board.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things that ties retention even to the usability of a pricing page is, when someone's potentially evaluating whether to keep a software, they may, send it off to someone else to take a look at. Or, I know for some of our people, I said, hey, are there any softwares that we don't need at this time? And I get sent some links, and it's almost my responsibility to, even if I never use the software, maybe look at what are the features and values and, what is it about? And I go and look at that pricing page. So you never know who, from a retention standpoint, might end up using that as a reference to be part of a decision process, whether to stay with the software or not.
That's a great point. Yeah.
And then next, we were really going to talk a little bit about some of the psychology pieces to pricing. And again, this may have to do with your pricing page design, but also to retention and what we just said, that if someone is in the software already using it and they're deciding to keep or upgrade, these may be things that influence it. So we've got a couple of these pieces that I always like, and this is something that I get a lot of enjoyment out of. It's kind of the behavioral psychology around things. But the first is anchoring, which is a common trend in almost any sales. And this is applicable not just to software, but really anything, is that, you create some product that is a point of reference for the rest of them. And this concept comes a lot from restaurants, is that, what they'll do is put that really expensive menu item right in between the menu items that they make the most profit from. And so, someone looks at it and sees that, $50 steak, but right below it, they see a $40 steak that, instead of being 10% profit is 30% profit. But the anchoring tells them, okay, the value of that, it's $10 lower. I don't want to go the highest price, but, it's anchoring me mentally to, what's the cost of this? Versus if around my most profitable items, I had something that was $5 and then my most profitable item $4 or $40, then I'm looking up in a different direction, and my mental, anchor of what the pricing is off. And so there's this huge psychology around, creating products and structures and pricing to set, a precedent in people's mind as they're looking through stuff.
And a powerful way to do that, if you're not super well established, is to, a lot of times you'll have like a comparison chart, and you show like the big players in your market, big competitors, and it doesn't even have to be a one-to-one match as far as what they do might be a little bit different, but if it's an alternative to you, then you can show that. And then that helps with the anchoring of showing the value, the pricing, whatever it is, that advantage that you have. That's the way to do that. But yeah, anchoring is really powerful.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's one that no matter what you should use, is because you want to make sure that people have something in their head as a reference point to your price, so that, and you want to precede that rather than them creating their own. Because if they come in and they think, somehow they get a reference point of $5, but you're trying to charge 50, you're going to have a lot of challenges moving them, versus if you can create a reference point up front of a higher price and then show them yours, it really helps increase conversion and retention and all that stuff a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
The charm and the uneven price really match. Charm is really that whole, and I kind of hate it, but things ending in 99 where it's $399 instead of $400. It is a mental thing that, and it's proven. People look at that front number, and for whatever reason, $399 seems much more appealing. And the odd even is really kind of a switch where, maybe you're doing something at 33, 66, 66, and 997 or something, and it just kind of ends in various odd or even numbers that are below what kind of the nearest rounded price point is. And so those ones are a little bit more about just kind of that weird psychology that people have and the way they perceive numbers, and kind of playing with that stuff.
Along those lines, yeah, I'm kind of with you that to me it's sometimes annoying to see those pricing options, but there's a lot of truth to it. And something I've seen a lot of is just the concept of rounding, right? We in our heads tend to round numbers. So I've seen some studies and things on price points where, let's say, someone's thinking of charging, over $50 for a product, and really they can overall maximize things if they went closer to like 99 as opposed to like a 69 or 79. Because once you're at that point, that rounding point, we think of in our minds, we've been taught since we were young kids that anything above 5 rounds up, right? And so a lot of times you can just maximize things by testing those different prices out. A lot of times there's not a whole lot of more pushback if it was the 79 or 99 as opposed to the 59 or 69. So interesting. I think there's only one way to figure all that out. It's to just test your pricing points. But yeah, it's kind of crazy how there's so much psychology in all this stuff.
Right. And then bundling, obviously, this is a big one, and we see it a lot in certain types of products, but that, hey, we're going to take these 5 things that are separate, and you can put them together, it's going to be a lower price. And so the bundling package works really well for those ideas where, you're really trying to get to upsell people. Yes, you can get that $399, but you want to have an average users that are spending $1,000. Well, what we can do is, instead of 4 $399 products, which is $1,200, we'll do all 4 for $1,000, and you're saving $200, and they're bundled together. But for you, what it is it's really, instead of getting people to just buy 1 or 2 or even 3 that are less than that, you're getting them to buy all 4, and you're getting a little bit of dollar, because people like that idea of like, oh, wow, I'm kind of getting all of these together, and it's one simple price, and it's a little bit lower.
Yeah. So also it's a way to just kind of stack value and make a really compelling case when there's multiple things bundled in for that, single price point.
Yep. And then high-low, which is, active alternating between high price and low price, a product marketed at a premium price before eventually being reduced to a lower. So basically, at the end of the day, this is that discount model, is that when you go to those sites and it's $12.99, but it's always discounted down to $9.99. Isn't that amazing how that works? And so it's really just that idea that is pretty popular, and you see it on Amazon and all these other platforms, especially in retail. is this whole idea of the markdown price. But it's pretty popular in the software space as well, is just that always reduced price of some sort.
Yeah, we see that's all over the place. I think we see that so much. I think you have to be careful not to do that so much that people almost feel like insulted. I remember, it kind of reminds me of, I used to play in bands and whatnot back in my college days, and Guitar Center was one of my favorite places to go, and it was always funny because literally every weekend they had like the biggest blowout sale, and they had direct mail pieces and radio advertisements, and they always made it like this weekend only, and then it was like, yeah, until next weekend. So to a certain point, it can be kind of insulting when you're seeing these dramatic price changes and low prices being offered, but a lot of times they work. So even though sometimes we, like things like the charm pricing and high-low can feel like we're onto them, a lot of times they still work.
Yeah, and the one that we really don't have here as well is like the limited time, and that kind of fits with that high-low, is creating a time limit on people, where you're saying it's $9.99 until the end of April, and so making people think like, okay, I've got to make a decision soon, and creating some sort of scarcity to the offer. That time piece really fits with this high-low one, is that creating that kind of effect too.
Yeah, for sure.
And then decoy is really an interesting one that we've seen, and it really comes from, you'll see it in the newspaper model a lot, is they'll say, get our digital version for $35, get our print version for $125, or get both our digital and print for $125. So really, at the end of the day, they're not, they're offering the same exact price for two different things, but they're kind of making the one option just seem a lot less desirable. Like there's just, oh, why would I do that when I can get both of these for the same price as that print one? And again, it's kind of a psychology piece of, if they're really setting a decoy for people to go after to get the price that they want.
It's kind of along the lines very similar to it like good, better, best, right? So that first good option, it's like a reasonable price and you get some of the features. The better is like, well, wow, for just a few bucks more, I can get all of that. So there's a bunch more. And then the best is, the highest cost, but there's a ton in there. And so it almost wipes out that first, column, the lowest priced option. Is like, well, why would I do that? I would at least go for that middle option. And then if I'm going to just spend that much, I might as well just go with go for everything, right? So again, a lot of psychology there, but there's a few different ways.
Stage mindset is the center stage is three options, and people always go for the middle option, which is a very proven fact. If, for whatever reason, we're always like, well, I don't want to go with the cheapest and I'm not going to spend on the highest, so I'm going to go for that middle. And that's why you see a lot of times most packages come in threes, is because they're driving people towards the middle. The difference between that center stage and decoy is the center stage is three varying levels, and really you're kind of driving people to that middle and knowing that that's where they're going to choose. Whereas the decoy kind of takes that one of those levels and puts it very close to the other one, just so it really is making it so that it's kind of reducing even the option of the third one, because it's only those two that people are looking at. So they're very close in their strategies, but they're slightly different.
And they're actually using some comparative anchoring, if you think about it that way, where it's like
100%. These again kind of overlap with each other. Is that the center stage? If you think of that, your top price and your bottom price are anchoring your center price. And so you've really got to think about that too, because they're going to see that top price, and it's going to set an anchor point in their head of the value of the overall software. and then you can kind of push them into that center stage where most people like to choose.
And then I think to add to, the center stage one, it's throw in the idea of social proof. And this is something that restaurants do as well, but a lot of software will put, most popular. Then there's arrows on that product. It's like, oh, well, if everybody else is buying that one, I want it too. So that's interesting just in and of itself. If it says most popular, then people will tend to really look at that option.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, I'm a huge fan of behavioral psychology, and it kind of goes to that there was a study where they were trying to get people to pay more taxes, and they would send out letters, and some of the letters would say something like, you're going to get a fine. Other letters would say, you could go to jail. Other letters would say different things. And the one that worked the most was saying, 8 out of 10 of your neighbors have already paid your taxes. You should too. And that letter actually worked the most, just because people have this whole idea they want to make sure that they're following what the people around them are doing. And so, even over the threat of fines and other stuff, people would ignore that. But 8 of their 10 neighbors having already paid it was something that really drove people to take action. And so that ties to that whole, like you're saying, kind of, this is what other people are choosing, drives people to that option.
And I heard of almost the, same concept kind of study. I was in hotels. A certain hotel chain was trying to reduce people just throwing all of their towels on the floor to, so they had to be refreshed. So how do we get people to conserve and all of that? And what worked was when they put the signs around the rooms that said, help us conserve, and, X percent of our guests, save their, reuse their towels or whatever. That was the most effective one, kind of just like your example. Yeah. So pretty interesting how impactful that can be when you use it.
Totally. So that's all we have for pricing today. This was, I think, a good discussion, and pricing is a great topic for people just starting out and thinking about conversion, but also that retention piece. And next Wednesday, we're diving into getting feedback from our audience on a multitude of things to make sure that we're getting the information we need to be strategic and keep users on.
Yeah, looking forward to it. That's a big one. We've talked a lot about feedback just as part of our discussions as we've gone along the way, but to dive in to more detail, really powerful one. So looking forward to it, and we'll see if I'm still in quarantine next week.
That sounds good. Well, I think it's a good show. If you're watching this now, go back and check some of our past episodes, as well as our previous series on conversion, and especially that pricing page one. I think it relates a lot to this discussion that we just had. So hopefully we'll see everybody next week, and they're all staying happy and healthy. And Tony, thanks for dialing in today.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
See you next time.